Hello and welcome to another remote edition of Currently in Quincy on this rainy May Day. I'm Joe Catalano. On today's program, we will chat with Quincy School Committee Vice Chairman Anthony Andronico and get an update on how the remainder of the school year here in Quincy will pan out. First, though, we check the news for you. Small businesses in Quincy can now apply for grants of up to $10,000 from the city through a new program that's being funded by federal dollars. Mayor Thomas Koch has decided to use the extra $1 million that the city received for the Community Development Block Grant Program, on top of $1 million for the pandemic, to assist small businesses that have been negatively impacted by the coronavirus. During an announcement at City Hall yesterday, Congressman Stephen Lynch said he was able to secure the additional federal funding.
When we pushed out the first tranche of money, which was $340 billion, what we tried to put into the SBA program in CARES 1, we also try to make sure that we funded the Community Development Block Grants. That's the CDBG, for those who are unfamiliar with it. But the CDBG monies give the authority and the discretion to our governors and our mayors, who we think have a better grasp on the needs within the state. So I have high confidence in Charlie Baker and in Mayor Koch that putting money into that CDBG pipeline will get to the people that need it most.
Now, those grants are aimed at helping small business owners pay their rents or mortgages or cover other costs. The grants are available to businesses with less than 20 employees, less than $1 million in gross annual revenue, and businesses that can demonstrate a significant loss of revenue since March 10th. Other restrictions apply, and the grant application form will be available on the city's website until at least May 15th. Businesses that are not eligible include real estate, cannabis, check cashing agencies, gun and pawn shops, liquor stores, adult entertainment stores, tattoo parlors, and dollar stores, among others. Independently owned national franchises will be considered on a case-by-case basis. Now, officials say the grants will be released on a merit-based system. They are not first-come, first-served. Almost half of the $1 million that was set aside to help pay the rents of Quincy restaurant and other hospitality workers has been spent. Mayor Thomas Koch says that represents 1 month's rent for about 400 workers, and he anticipates the funds will be depleted when another month's rental payments are made for May. The funds were set aside from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and are being administered by the Quincy Chamber of Commerce and Quincy Community Action Programs. The South Shore YMCA of Quincy says they are extremely grateful to Quincy auto dealer Dan Quirk for donating a brand new cargo van after theirs broke down this week. YMCA President Paul Gorman says their 16-year-old van broke down, leaving them without a way to collect food from the Greater Boston Food Bank and from local supermarkets. Gorman says Quirk immediately offered the new vehicle. Those food donations are distributed at the Wise Germantown Neighborhood Center Food Pantry on Palmer Street and are also used for the temporary homeless shelter and the emergency child care center at the Y on Coddington Street. Still, no decisions about high school graduations have been made here in Quincy. School Committee Vice Chair Anthony Andronico says officials are considering everything from hosting some type of a virtual graduation or having a ceremony in the fall, or both. He says a traditional graduation at Veterans Memorial Stadium is likely not going to happen. Andronico says officials are asking for the seniors and their families to offer their input into what they would like to do for graduations this year. We'll talk with Andronico coming up shortly. Healthcare workers on the front lines of the coronavirus pandemic got a hero's thank you at Beth Israel Deaconess Hospital, Milton, this week. A parade of first responders in their police cruisers, fire trucks, DPW trucks, ambulances all greeted doctors and nurses and expressed their sincere thanks for their tireless efforts in treating patients with COVID-19. Milton Hospital is in the process of building a brand new health center at the former Quincy Career Center in Quincy Center. President Rich Fernandez says the pandemic has slowed that process down, but he still hopes to have that new health center open by the end of this year. Also this week, healthcare workers at South Shore Hospital in Weymouth were treated to a warm welcome and thank you from many people who were dressed up as comic book superheroes, including Superman, Batman, Iron Man, and the Incredible Hulk. 3 new police officers are joining the Quincy force this week. Officers Scott Kelly, Matthew O'Flaherty, and Ryan Callanan have over a dozen years of law enforcement experience combined. The new officers were officially sworn in on April 6th and are participating now in the Quincy Police Field Training Program. Due to the pandemic, instead of riding together, each new officer is assigned to one field training officer and they ride in separate vehicles. Scott Kelly is a lifelong Quincy resident and is married with a 2-year-old daughter. Officer Matthew O'Flaherty comes from the Chelsea Police Department and also served 4 years in the U.S. Marine Corps. And Officer Ryan Callanan comes from the UMass Boston Police Department. He is a U.S. Army veteran, having served in Afghanistan and also in the Army Reserves. Well, the Quincy High School class of 1974 has donated $500 from their class reunion fund to the Quincy Relief Fund. Grants from that fund are dedicated to members of the community and organizations in most need during the COVID-19 pandemic and health emergency. At this time, the Quincy High class of 74 is challenging other Quincy and North Quincy High classes, as well as individuals, to do the same on behalf of their graduating class. Those donations can be made at quincyrelieffund.com. Coming up, we sit down with Quincy School Committee Vice Chair Anthony Andronico next.
As we work to get through these times together, you may not be thinking about blood donation, but blood is needed to save the lives of people who are sick with a range of illnesses. It's easy and safe to give. If you are in good health, please donate. We need heroes now. Visit redcrossblood.org to schedule an appointment.
There will be parties again soon, and family gatherings. There will be parades, and sporting events, and concerts. To help our communities when they come back together, respond to the 2020 census now. Spend a few minutes online today to impact the next 10 years of healthcare, infrastructure, and education. Go to 2020census.gov and respond today to make America's tomorrow brighter. It's time to shape our future.
Pleased to chat virtually with Quincy School Committee Vice Chairman Anthony Andronico to get an update on the latest school committee meeting and also just what's going on in the Andronico world. Hey, Anthony, good to see you.
Hey, Joe, thanks for having me. It's nice to meet with you virtually again and check in. I hope you're doing well, and I hope everyone that's watching is staying safe and staying healthy as well.
Thank you. Yes, I am. And same to you and yours as well. However, of course, although the schools are closed now for the rest of the years, we found out from the governor not too long ago, planning continues and you're still meeting. So how did the meeting go last night?
Yeah, last night we had our third virtual meeting. I think in some prior meetings we had some technical difficulties, but that's to be expected with anything, as you transition to a new format. But yeah, last night's meeting was pretty good. We had a lot of things to talk about. Phase 3 of remote learning from the commissioner's office and the implementation of that. We talked about our need for an interim superintendent and moving that forward. And we also discussed, where we're at with budgeting and what the outlook might be for next year. So certainly a few things to talk about.
Absolutely. Can we talk more about remote learning? And let me ask you, how that's working out in your view, and what is the next step?
Yeah, so on Friday of last week, Commissioner Riley from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed gave districts phase 3 of remote learning. And essentially phase 3 includes, refining learning plans, teaching content standards to make sure that heading into next year, that students are where they need to be. And then I think most importantly, it's moving as many students as possible over to remote learning. And remote learning itself isn't necessarily just technology. It's not just learning online. So the way that we're supplementing right now online learning is also with remote learning packets that we are passing out to students at all of our food distribution sites. There are 8 across the city. And I actually have a few stats in front of me that I do want to bring up with the work that our teachers have been doing. Next week is actually Teacher Appreciation Week. I want to give our teachers a shout out for all the work that they've been putting in. But I mean, right now we've got 93% of our students that have access to technology. We've given out Chromebooks to over 10% of our student population. And as far as making posts and teachers posting, we have 2,300 active Google Classrooms. And in the month of April alone, teachers have made 62,000 posts on those sites. I mean, we're all adjusting to the new normal. But even last night, we saw some of the interactive videos that teachers are making and posting at every level within Quincy Public Schools. So hats off to them for adjusting on the fly and I think getting us to where we are.
I know that initially the discussion with remote learning was at least maintaining, where students had been in their education, maybe not introducing new material, but at least, not letting them fall behind. Is that still the thought process?
In general, the thought process to make sure that as we move forward, that we're not excluding anyone from moving forward. So I know that while there are many students and families that feel comfortable moving forward and continuing with new lesson plans and continuing, within the curriculum. We also need to make sure that the resources are in place for those that might not have as many supports at home to be able to continue as well. I mean, that's the goal of Quincy Public Schools, is to make sure that everyone can move forward. So we're mindful of that in general, but if we're making sure that the potential work is out there, so if families would like to access it, that it becomes available. And again, we're entering into phase 3 with remote learning, and it's to make sure that students are prepared to, as much as we possibly can, that they're prepared to enter next year where they should be. So that's our goal.
Okay. And how are you going to handle, grading and report cards, kind of accountability issues? Yeah.
So we had our high school principals in actually last night to talk a little bit about that and GPA, and especially for juniors. I mean, they're heading into a critical year and applying colleges. It's a big year. But in high school, what we're doing, they have quarters typically, and the third quarter and the fourth quarter have essentially been combined into one. We were a few weeks out from closing the third quarter and giving out grades, but ultimately the decision was made to wipe that and have it not count. I know there are a lot of larger items in terms of grading that come up at the end of a quarter. So we thought the most fair thing to do as a district was to make sure that the second half of the year for high schoolers essentially didn't contribute to your grades or to your GPA calculation. And we're operating on a credit, no credit basis now for work. And that's been the recommendation from the state. And it's exactly what all the towns surrounding us have been doing as well.
Okay, and I've heard from many of even the higher institutions that they will accept that. Basically, this is something that's nationwide,
right?
That's unique here. So they're taking that into consideration when seniors are applying for colleges or have already been accepted.
Right. I mean, a lot of colleges are easing their expectations and their requirements. Not requiring SATs, and everyone's going to be mindful of this as we move forward. So if anyone at home is a little nervous, about, their child's grades and how's that going to work. Or they were having a really great semester. Everyone, I think at that next level is conscious of that, and they're going through the same thing there as well. So I know there's a level of understanding that's happening.
Right. Now, is the MCAS requirement, is that off the table? That's been canceled?
So that's also been waived by the Commissioner of Education in Massachusetts. So no one needs to worry about MCAS or that requirement moving into next year. Quincy Public Schools has waived that requirement as well per order of the state. So no one needs to worry about that heading into the next year. But it will be interesting as we move forward how the district measures success as we reflect on this past year. So it'll present some challenges even when this is all over. But I feel confident in our abilities to present a good face of character and a good judge of character.
Sure. Now, will the remote learning continue right through, June 17th is the last day of school, right? So is that the plan?
Right. Yeah, so that phase 3 will continue through the end of this school year. And then phase 4, which the commissioner has talked about, will occur in September and continuing. And, how do you reopen schools? Do we reopen schools? What will that look like? And actually in between, for summer programming, the superintendent, the leadership team have discussed with us a few different ways that we can continue learning over the summer for those that would like it. Those summer programs won't look exactly the same as they have in the past, but it's important to do everything that we can to make sure students are where they need to be heading into next year, and that will include a little more robust summer learning programs than we've seen in the past.
Okay. And how are you making accommodations, Anthony, for students who are English as second language learners and for special needs students also?
Yeah, so the commissioner also has guidelines on that. And part of the presentation we received last night included, what are the virtual meetings looking like, weekly check-ins, whether you can offer, I think, OT and PT. And I believe we'd actually discussed part of that at our last check-in. Just to go over that, those services still exist. They don't exist in the same way that they did previously, like with any service we're providing. But we're working with our families. I know Erin Parkins is doing an incredible job making sure that we connect with those families, and that we do everything we can to carry out the services that we've committed to provide to those families as well.
Sure. You mentioned the superintendent, of course, since last we chatted, there's been some major news here. Dr. DeCristofaro moving on to the president of Quincy College. So what's next?
Yeah, I mean, first I just want to say thank you to Dr. DeCristofaro. He's given, over 45 years of his career to Quincy Public Schools. He served as assistant superintendent since 1993, and then he became superintendent in 2001. The man literally built the school system that I'm a proud product of. So I want to thank him for all of his hard work. It does not go unnoticed. It's never gone unnoticed. And we're really thankful that he was at the helm of QPS for as long as he was. Having said that, though, things are going to continue to move forward. And last night at our school committee meeting, we discussed the interim process and then an overall search process for a permanent superintendent and what that might look like. And the school committee ultimately took a vote on the interim process that we're going to post the job internally for interim superintendent for QPS through next Tuesday. We're going to allow those employees who have a superintendent certification to submit letters of interest to the school committee. So we know, and everyone's on a level playing field, and we know who's interested. And it also adds a layer of transparency and I think accountability for us, that everyone in the public is aware of what options were available to us. And so really right now, we'll see who submits a letter of interest. And then we'll have a meeting next Wednesday to discuss who submitted and move forward from there. That's essentially where we're at. I know we have an incredible team, especially at the senior level, and we talk about it every meeting. It's where Dr. DeCristofaro has put together an incredible team around him, and we want to give some of those folks an opportunity to step forward. So that's sort of where we're at next Wednesday's meeting. We'll talk more about it. And then on the other side, as far as a longer search process, we're still discussing in public what that's going to look like. But at the very least, something we touched upon was putting together a leadership profile for the superintendent's position. Essentially what that is, it's a survey to the public, to our teachers, to our parents, to students, to those with other staff members within QPS about what they want the next superintendent to have. So that's background qualifications. That's what challenges you think that a superintendent will need to deal with in QPS over the next 5 years, and some of the qualities they're looking for in a superintendent. And not to mention also questions you'd like the school committee to ask superintendent candidates. So I think in general, the school committee is committed to making sure that the process is fair, it's open and transparent. It's not something, we do every day. And I think it's the most consequential decision that we'll ever need to make in anyone's tenure. So it's a big decision, and it's one that needs to be out in the public. So I think that's how we'll operate moving forward.
Yeah. Do you have any kind of a timeline? Did the committee discuss the timeline for appointing a permanent new superintendent?
Yeah, so we've discussed that. We touched upon it last night. We voted last night. The interim superintendent position will run through September 1st, essentially through the next year. However, we did allow the leeway for us to extend that by 90 days per a school committee vote. So really, we're going to move through this process, I think, as quickly as we can. I appreciate whoever the next interim superintendent will need to be. They'll have a lot of difficult issues to move forward with. I mean, we're talking about dealing with the current public health crisis. Schools are shut down. That person will need to deal with potentially reopening up Quincy Public Schools, and that's a tall task. And it's one that we need to carefully think about who that leader is going to be. But at the same time, we know that it's fair that we close this process as quickly as we possibly can, given the constraints, because people, I think, deserve a definitive answer on who's going to lead us moving forward. So everyone is in agreement that we're going to get through this as quickly as we can, but we can't sacrifice thoroughness through the process as well.
Sure. Was there discussion about reopening, Anthony? I've seen some initial guidelines from other school systems where, desks would be spaced 6 feet apart. There'd be lunch in the classroom instead of the cafeteria, things of that nature. Did that come up at all?
Right. So we didn't get into exactly how that would look. I think we're still waiting on phase 4 from the Department of Education, but those are some things they've talked about, limiting lunch to just within the classroom, spacing out desks as much as you can. I would like to point out on that note, that was part of the reason why Quincy Public Schools made the decision to close before the state announced that we were closing. Their guidelines essentially said students and people would need to be spaced out at least 6 feet apart. And there was just no way spatially that we could make that happen within our buildings, and no school district could. So if those are still the guidelines, we're not going to reopen if that's the case. So I think in general, we're going to have to get to a point where our public health leaders and our state leaders say that it's safe for schools to reopen, and here are reasonable guidelines that all schools can follow. But I know at the very least, even now, our staff is working hard to make sure that our facilities are cleaned, that we're doing deep cleanings for the buildings that are being used. And I would expect that to continue when there is a reopening, because we need to make sure ultimately that our students are safe and healthy as well as our staff.
Sure. Was there any initial discussion on, the next year's budget? I mean, obviously the mayor is the chairman of the school committee and has ultimate control over the budget. And, he's not ready to put a city budget together yet. So I'm sure the school budget is in limbo as well.
Right. So again, just to reiterate for the folks at home, the budget process is typically the mayor will present a budget to the city council, and then the city council within that approves a bottom line number for the school committee to work with. And then the school committee takes that number and we make our budget work within that number. And last night, the mayor did let us know that he's going to present a budget in the next few weeks to the city council. And I think at our next meeting, we'll start to get into a little bit more of what a budget for next year will look like. I know there are a lot of concerns about the services and what's going to happen. Essentially, the mayor reiterated to us last night that services should expect at this point to remain where they are for this year. We're not currently looking at layoffs at this point in time. I do want to stress at this point in time, I mean, things can change drastically, unfortunately, and we never really know exactly what the situation is. The state, at least the House of Representatives at the state level, has indicated that they won't even have a budget to give for the state until July. I mean, and that's typically when a new fiscal year would begin, and we'd be into that next year. So I think we're all going to be operating a little bit differently, but right now the expectation is that services should be the same, and folks should expect to continue to have those level of services moving forward.
Unfortunately, this was going to be the year that the new state education funding formula was to take effect through the Student Opportunity Act and really infuse some new cash into the public school system. Where does that stand? Yeah.
Right. I think that's also in limbo. The Student Opportunity Act would have injected an additional, I think it's $1.5 billion over the next 7 years, and that's total on a gradual step basis. But that's on top of what step increases would have been for Chapter 70 funding from the state for education. Quincy was set to receive, I believe it was $6.5 million from that Student Opportunity Act. And that funding is essentially in limbo at the moment. And I know Commissioner Riley has a May 15th deadline right now for districts to submit plans to use that funding. But last night at our meeting, the school committee took a vote to ask for an extension on that deadline. And that joins a number of districts across Massachusetts that have asked for an extension on that. And the reason we did that was for two reasons, really. One is we essentially don't believe that the state will be able to give that funding out. And we're at a time when having those at the administrative level need to present a plan to the school committee and also then present to the public what those plans would be. It's a lot of work that looks like it doesn't appear it's pressing, considering that funding is not going to be there come the fall. So we'll see what happens in the next few days. But at the very least, I know QPS is prepared, though, to have that presentation to the school committee and get public input turned around as quickly as we possibly can if need be. The commissioner does have the authority to not only extend for individual districts, but extend that May 15th deadline for the entire state. And my thought is that in the next week or so that will happen. But we can only wait and see.
Okay, yeah, good to know that you're ready to go just in case. You wouldn't want to miss $6.5 million, yeah.
Right, and I know at least before this that the team was prepared to give a presentation. We actually had a public meeting scheduled to go over what those plans would look like. So there is a plan. It's simply the presentation of that plan and the feedback that needs to occur.
Okay. One question, Anthony, that's on graduating seniors' minds and their families. Will there be high school graduations this year?
Right. So I don't think that high school graduations will take place the way that everyone is accustomed to, or when they're accustomed to either. I feel for our seniors and their families. I mean, it's something that everyone looks forward to, is their high school graduation, and it's a memory that I think all of us have. I do know that the class of 2020 will never forget their high school graduation for certain. But we talked last night about a few options that are available to us, whether it be a virtual graduation for our seniors, or if we push graduation off into later in the summer when it's appropriate that we have it. At this point, I think we're looking for some feedback from families and from seniors about what it is that they want. Ultimately, this is their graduation, and we want to make sure that we do right by them and that they're recognized for all the hard work that they put in, and that we're ensuring that everyone has that opportunity to graduate in a way that's safe and healthy. So we're still looking into the options, but right now I think everything is still on the table as far as the decision-making process, whether it's virtual, whether we push it off later into the summer, or both. I know typically, I know at least at Quincy High, students, seniors will go back in the fall for a cookout with Principal Taglieri and staff, and they get their yearbooks. And maybe is that a proper time to maybe also host a graduation? But really, it's wait and see. But those discussions are underway, and we just want to do right by our seniors.
Sure. A lot of unanswered questions, obviously, right now. Nobody really knows. Yeah. Folks do want to reach out to you or to the committee. What are some good ways for them to do that, Anthony?
Right. I mean, you can always reach us by our emails. My personal email is anthonyandronico@quincypublicschools.com. And the best way to find our other contact info is to visit quincypublicschools.com. And you can click on that school committee tab right at the top, and it should provide all of the information as far as contacts are concerned. And not to mention, it also gives you agendas and the latest materials from the school committee, and in general, materials on the latest from Quincy Public Schools.
Yeah, I can't help but think how timely it was to get that new website up and running just before this hit.
Yes, I'm very thankful that we got that up and running.
Anything else you'd like to share right now?
No, nothing right now. I just want to let everyone at home know, just stay home, stay safe, stay healthy, continue to practice social distancing and listen to our public health officials. Those guidelines are in place for a reason. And, I know everyone is going through a difficult time, but we are all in this together. And when I say that, I truly mean it. So if you need any assistance or you have questions about QPS, please do reach out. That's why members of the school committee are here, and we'll get through this together.
Great. Really appreciate your time. And maybe we can catch up again after your next meeting, if that's okay.
That sounds good to me, Joe. Thanks so much for having me.
You're very welcome. Okay. Take care.
Thanks. You too.
Bye-bye. Special thanks to Quincy School Committee Vice Chairman Anthony Andronico for joining us today. Thank you to our crew working remotely from home, and thank you for watching. A reminder to please send us your videos of life during the pandemic. We want to see how you're working or schooling from home and creative ways that you're using to pass the time. Just email your videos to covid19@qatv.org. The first episode is already on Channel 8 and on our website. And please do visit our websites for the latest information on the pandemic, as well as other community information to help you get through the crisis. Go to qatv.org. For all of us here at Quincy Access Television, I'm Joe Catalano. Please stay safe.